The sophistication of the private sector is improving, and particularly important, the level of collaboration between the private sector and the government, especially the FBI, has, I think, made significant strides.
Okay, so our last guest, James Lindsay, made the obvious point. Public-private partnership, public-private, that's just fascism. It's just a fancy way of saying fascism. And when you have that guy, Chris Wray, who's the head of the FBI, talking about, hey, we got great cooperation with the FBI, that should be a concern, you'd think. Jordan Schachtel is here. He's the publisher of The Dossier on Substack. Make sure you subscribe to that. Jordan, how are you, brother?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Let me just give you a chance to react to that. What is Chris Wray talking about exactly? Give me maybe best case scenario, and then we could put our conspiratorial hat on, which more often than not turns out to be the true thing.
Best case scenario is that he just wants people to chip in and help the FBI investigate crimes in an ethical manner. I'm not even sure why
that was torture.
The domestic law enforcement agency is in Davos, because the FBI's purview is not supposed to leave the United States, but that's a whole separate issue. I think worst case scenario is that he's talking about this, what James Lindsay described as fascism, or any type of anti-freedom, pro-surveillance movement. The FBI is certainly a big part of that. That they just don't believe in the principle of free speech. I mean, I lived in DC for a pretty long time and got to know a lot of these Department of Justice officials. And the idea of people speaking freely amongst themselves without being monitored by the government, they view that as extremism. The idea that we have our fundamental liberties, that they should remain in check through, encrypted apps or, through parallel systems. They think that as, basically we're all a bunch of drug dealers and terrorists if we don't want to be monitored by the government.
Do you think they think that because they're in this world, this secret, important, clandestine world, and what they know is very, very important, and you people don't understand, and where do you think that comes from? This idea that freedom of speech isn't a thing people should have.
Yeah, it's not only the sense that I get from the Washington elites, but certainly from the Davos ruling class. I mean, in fact, Klaus Schwab has authored several books over the past few years, and this is a major sticking point of his. In fact, he always seems to have major dislike for the resistance, which he informs the reader is largely based in the United States. There's tens of millions of people in this country who are stubbornly affixed to the constitutional rights that they possess, and I think that a character like Christopher Wray perfectly fits in, because he's just a member of this uniparty blob that feels that they have the right to run roughshod over our freedom. So that's why they now have intelligence officials who share this worldview leading the delegation to Davos. I mean, Davos is supposed to be an organization supposedly about economic cooperation, and yet you have the Director of National Intelligence and Chris Wray and these other figures involved in this multinational surveillance, supposed law enforcement schemes, leading the delegation. I think it speaks volumes that a person like that is at Davos.
And I shouldn't even be asking this because I don't know enough to even ask the question properly, but wasn't there some woman who said something like, we need to reconfigure freedom of speech rights or something like that? Does that ring a bell?
It's almost every panelist. The lady that was speaking to Brian Stelter, I don't know what her name was, and Stelter was kind of just nodding in approval, because when you go to Davos, it's not actually a place to debate. It's a place to network in person in this closed door setting amongst the ruling elite, and of course they only invite the corporate press, who are all partners to Davos. So there's no room for debate. It's all just conformity. And even people who claim to support speech, like a guy fired CNN anchor Brian Stelter, when this lady's talking to him, attacking the First Amendment, he's just makes sense. He actually can't debate this issue. And I actually wrote about this in my Substack, that it's just Davos is just a clown show where the ruling class just agrees amongst themselves about what they want to impose upon civilization. And in fact, the World Economic Forum people stress this repeatedly, that there's no dissent from the climate narrative, the fascist narrative, nothing. Dissent means you're removed from the club, and nobody wants to be removed from the club.
Yeah, that's right. Great point. We got about 1 minute. Tell me what you know about digital IDs. Our first guest mentioned it briefly here, but what's the vision, the ultimate vision, and how can they implement digital IDs around the world?
Yes, so whether it's digital ID or central bank digital currency, this is basically the ruling class, the global ruling class, gaslighting people into, they want to make you believe that technology is going to free you from those everyday hassles like preserving your privacy. So I think, digital ID, you can see that through what China did with their COVID vaccine passports, where basically like you scan this QR code through this flying drone in the sky. And if the flying drone says like you're not approved to pass through, then you're basically stuck in your zone. Digital ID is meant to surveil and impose privacy restrictions on the entire population. It's just, whether it's digital ID, the metaverse, central bank digital currencies, they're just always thinking of ways to craft like a bumper sticker marketing slogan for surveillance and the vacuuming up of power in their hands.
Hey, thanks for watching that clip about the World Economic Forum. Super important to understand what's going on. But the thing is, when you learn about this stuff, I don't know, but my anxiety goes up. It's like global digital IDs and like we're not allowed to eat meat anymore. We're going to eat bugs. Like, what are you talking about? So I get very anxious. So that's why I started this podcast. It's called Politics by Faith. So what we do is we take the story of the day, we break it down, we lament the brokenness, but then we provide some historical perspective and some biblical peace to understand that there's nothing new under the sun. And then what we can do to get through this, even more than get through it, what we can do to win. So that's what the podcast is all about. You can give it a download. It's free, of course, wherever you listen to your podcast, Politics by Faith. And you can watch, you can feel the anxiety wash away.